great panel with people who know what's going on in different European countries, and that's what we'll be discussing. We'll be diving a little bit more into the Economic Freedom Index and discussing what's going on, what are the current trends, what's been going on for a while, and what's happening right now, and what do we think are the possibilities for free market reform that will increase the economic freedom of private individuals and businesses in the different European countries. We face different challenges in different countries, so it's great to have some people. So you've had the names up there. Oh, now my presentation is on. So I think I'll just do my intro and then just a brief presentation of the panel afterwards. So after my intro, that'll be about 10 minutes. We'll go through the panel and 5-7 minutes of each panelist on their countries, and then we'll open up for debate. My name is Martin Agerup. I'm from a free market think tank in Copenhagen called CEPOS, and what I'll be doing is I'll be comparing the economic freedom index trends in different European countries, just looking a little bit more into the index and what that might tell us. I'll look at trends over time and some ideas about potential for the future. Now, I have two apologies. One is for the presentation, which doesn't run on the Parliament computer quite the way it should. I've been to thousands of places using this, but the European Parliament is the one place that doesn't have an updated browser. I saw there was another conference on the digital revolution going on, I thought maybe we should get those guys in here, and they can start at home. The other thing I want to apologize for is my voice. I don't always sound like a Chicago gangster, but I think it will carry through, especially over the loudspeaker. I might be coughing a little bit during the session, and I hope I won't annoy you, but I'll probably annoy you in all kinds of other ways. Here we go. Now, first of all, let's just look at the European countries. What level are they at? So this is the latest economic freedom data, and as you can see, you got Ireland, the United Kingdom, etc. And you end up with Greece at the bottom. It's not surprising that's the way it is, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later. You can also see that some of the sub-indices, so it's divided up into size of government, legal system, etc., and some of the sub-indices has more variation between countries than others. That's significant as well, and we get a little bit into that. So let's just look at a different measurement of a similar type of issue, the Doing Business Index. And one of the things that spring to mind is that Greece is still at the bottom, but there are some differences at the top, and among countries where they're positioned. A country like I think it's Romania is positioned more favorably on sorry, I'm having trouble seeing this. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. That is a comparison of the two indices. So anything that is below the line are countries that are doing worse on the Economic Freedom Index than you'd expect looking at the Doing Business Index. And the ones above are the ones doing better on economic freedom than you'd expect looking at the Doing Business Index. I don't know what that shows us. It might show us something. I think maybe it does show us that maybe economic freedom is a bit more a clearer indication that why Greece is in such a mess as it is, because Greece is not that far behind Luxembourg on the Doing Business Index. So maybe that's a sort of an indication that economic freedom is in some ways a better measure of the overall performance of an economy than the Doing Business Index. Next one, please. Okay, so let's look at trends over time. Next one. So this is the change in the economic freedom of individual countries for over the 15-year period. we're not surprised to see that the countries that have had the biggest increase in economic freedom are the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, because they had a lot of catching up to do. They joined the European Union, etc. Some might be a little bit surprised or maybe disappointed in seeing that as we move towards Western Europe, we see that economic freedom is actually stagnating or even declining. Next one, please. This is just the same thing for the last 10 years instead of the last 15 years, and it's the same kind of trend. Next one. And actually looking at the different countries, we can confirm that there's been a development for the old EU members, the blue line, where they've increased their economic freedom, and it's stagnated since the turn of the millenniums approximately, and the new members have been catching up, and now they're sort of neck to neck on economic freedom. And it might be a little bit worrying, or very worrying that there's this stagnation in Western Europe. And also, the catching up a lot of the catching up has been on things that where you've had low-hanging fruit, like getting sound money. I'll get to that. It's maybe easier than some of the stuff that's ahead of us. So, next slide. Okay, we'll move on. So these are the sources of increase in the new member countries. So the ones that have had an increase, and you can see that if you look at the sub-indices of the Economic Freedom Index, it's the one that by far contributes the most to the increase is sound money. But you also get some from size of government. So the size of government has been going down somewhat as a share of GDP, and some from regulation as well. Okay, next one. That's one. It's a little bit tricky, but so the blue ones are, so there's a dark blue and a light blue. There's a dark red and a light red, etc. And the dark ones are 2000, and the light ones are 2015. And the blue is south, and you can see at the bottom what countries that is. And the red one is, what does it say? North, and the green one is central. The basic lessons are that it's the same kind of pattern in all countries. So on the sub indices, you've had a decline in some areas, and it's the same. It's not as if you've seen vastly different developments in the south from the north, for instance, or so that's the old European countries there. And yeah, sorry, go on. So I think some thoughts on all this. You know, could you go to the next one and then go back? I'll just show you this one. It's kind of interesting. Sweden had a big economic crisis in the early 90s, and you can see how Sweden reacted to that. They increased economic freedom quite substantially. And Greece had obviously not a similar, but also a big economic crisis after the financial crisis, and you can see how they reacted, the exact opposite. And I'm not saying that development directly led to very different results, but it sort of indicates that you have two different systems, that one that is capable of dealing with, institutionally capable of dealing with a crisis in a capable manner, and one system that is not really. But maybe also that there is something there that has to do with when it happened. You know, you could look at Western Europe and say, well, why didn't we react to crisis the way Sweden did in the 90s by increasing economic freedom after 2008? Because, okay, nowhere did it go as bad as Greece, but in the rest of Europe, we didn't exactly increase economic freedom. So that's kind of interesting and something we might think about. Please go back one. Can you do that? Okay. So some thoughts on that. So in the past, we've increased economic freedom through all kinds of things that maybe were a little bit easier to go by. So there was some low-hanging fruit, as I've already mentioned. How to combat inflation? Well, we knew that. I mean, Milton Friedman and all that. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So you create an independent central bank, and you can do that. It does require some political will, but it's possible. And it's easy to understand what you need to do. And in terms of free trade, when you have a lot of tariffs, it's easy to see what the problem is. You just get rid of the tariffs, and that's it. But now we're facing all kinds of more complex problems, like how to increase productivity, and how to get rid of non-tariff barriers. And those are much trickier questions to deal with, so we need to work much harder to solve those problems. And if you could go to the next one. No, just go through it, yeah. So this is just an example from my country. That's counting the number of words in all the laws in Denmark over time. And it just goes up and up and up. And you can also see the number of laws is going up as well. We're doing some research now where we're scraping the internet for all the laws in Denmark, counting the words and counting the ways in which you can see that there are compulsions and stuff you must do and things you cannot do, like words like must or cannot or whatever. And we're carrying that on through 11 to 2017, and we see the same pattern. It's just increasing, making societies more and more complex. And that stuff is going on. Everybody's talking about wanting to cut the regulatory burden, etc. And some stuff has been done that, but the true societal costs of regulation are much more subtle than just looking at the regulatory burden, the burden of compliance. So one example of that is if you have, let's say that the Danish parliament introduced a crazy law banning women from working. Now, nobody would dream of doing that, it's just an example. And if we did that, the cost of compliance would be very small. I mean, it's very easy to find out if the person you're considering employing is a woman, but the total cost to society, the social and economic costs are obviously much, much larger. And that probably goes for most regulation, that just looking at the cost of compliance, that's a tiny part of the cost of regulation. And I think a lot of new research is indicating that regulation is some of the stuff we need to work hard on. The Trump administration, I'm no Trump fan, but the Trump administration is one of the good things they're doing is they're working on that. And we should be looking at that, and we should be studying what's going on, I think. Next one, please. So where's the potential? Next one. This is looking at the different sub-indices and indicating which country is number 1 on each sub-index, which is number 2 and which is number 3. And as you can see, it's actually quite different. It's not as if one country is just the best at everything. So that could be kind of an indication that we don't need necessarily to look that far into the world to get some good ideas on how to do things. We can just look around Europe, and there are countries that are in terms of economic freedom, are on the right path. So next one. So this is if you take the best practice on each sub-index, you don't go further down into the economic freedom index. You stop at the top level of the sub-indices and just take the best, the country that's the best on one and on sound money, and one that's the best on size of government, and you combine that into a sort of science fiction super economic freedom European state. And if you did that, you'd get the European Union state at the top 3 in the world. So, I mean, it's not an impossible task. Next one, please. Let's just a little bit of talk about institutional equivalence, because some people say, well, you can't do that because each country has its own ways, and there are ways in which some things work in one country but wouldn't work in another, and that's certainly true. I mean, nobody could argue with that. And one argument for this institutional equivalence is going on and is mentioned a lot in different European countries, and it has to do with my country, so I thought I'd mention that. It's the Flexicurity Model. The idea is that in order to have a flexible labor market, and earlier we saw a presentation from the Lithuanian Free Market Institute index on labor flexibility showing that Denmark was on top. So there's a lot of arguments going that that's only possible because we have very high transfer payments in Denmark. And if we cut transfer payments, then we couldn't have the flexible labor market because unions and employees would demand more security if they don't have, less flexibility if they didn't have the security in the transfer system. So high unemployment benefits, long unemployment benefits period. The fact of the matter is, if you go to the next one, and it is true that in Denmark people stay a very short time in the same job, which does mean that there's a good possibility of making sure that people are employed in the places where they'll be the most productive and get the highest wages. Next one. But I think the fact we need to understand is that the way this mechanism works is that people feel secure, not because they're not going to lose their job. People feel secure because they know that if they lose their job, it's easy to find another job. And that's what's going on. There's actually no connection between how secure people feel and how tight the labor regulation is. So in a country like Denmark, we have very low unemployment, virtually no long-term unemployment, and therefore people feel secure, even though it's easy for them to lose their job. Next one. And as you can see, we've cut things like the unemployment benefit period over long haul very, very significantly without without losing the flexibility in the labor market. So that's a bit of a myth there. And I think that was my last slide, but push the button and let's see if that's true. It wasn't. Well, that's just showing across countries that the correlation is, if there is any correlation between security and flexibility, it goes the other way than what the flexicurity theory would suggest. That must be the last slide, surely. It was.